Yeah, it's weekly download time. It's weekly download time. It is time for the weekly download. Download time. It's weekly download time. Now we're going to learn some stuff. It's weekly download time. Weekly download time. It is time for the weekly download. Download time. It's weekly download time. And now we're going to learn some stuff. Yeah, what's up, everybody? If you are in America, happy Thanksgiving. Yes, be thankful. Life is awesome. Life is good. And we're celebrating not just Thanksgiving today, but this is the weekly download number 50. It has been almost a year since I started the weekly download, and it is a vast archive now at this point with tons and tons and tons of different stuff. So today I got a pretty exciting thing. I'm going to show you a couple really simple ways that you can use reverb to make your music a lot more exciting. I find like one of the biggest problems with people's music when they're starting out is that their sounds are really dry. They're kind of like not processed, or if they are processed, they sound like over processed and like in a box, you know, because when you put too much EQ and too much compressor, it tends to make the sounds like they sound like they're in a box, you know. So if you find your music's really like muffled or boxy sounding, definitely less processing is a good idea. But when people do start processing their tracks, a lot of the time they don't reach for reverb, or if they do reach for reverb, they're using it in kind of the same way, whereas they just have like a reverb send on a track. But there's times when you want to use reverb as like a sound design tool, not just as a, you know, like a little bit of shimmer and space. And I think using reverb in kind of unconventional ways, it is a really subtle way to give your tracks this like tweaky life where you're like, whoa, like what is going on with this track? So I made a few kind of simple sounds here. I'm just going to show you a couple ways to do reverb tricks, okay? So first of all, I want to show you an effect that I call the Haas reverb, okay? So the Haas effect is basically accomplished where you take a delay and you make the left and right speakers hit your ears at slightly different times. So I'm going to do that now. Just make a quick Haas effect here. Turn these two filters off. Take sync off on both of these. And now the left ear is going to hit you 1 millisecond. Like if I put the feedback to 0, right, like this, the left ear is going to hit you 1 millisecond after the note plays, and then the right ear, let's say 30 milliseconds after. Well, actually, let's do 15 to start. Now, check it out. Watch what happens before. So you see how that amount of time is like, that amount of time is not enough for you to hear them as separate notes, but it's enough to create the feeling that it's coming out of the two speakers separately. Okay, so listen for that, especially if you have headphones. So this is without. Actually, I'll make it into a more, I'll add some harmonics to this oscillator here so you can hear it a bit better. Oops, there we go. Oh my god, I accidentally made the X-Files arpeggiator. That's hilarious. Right, so the Haas effect is a really good way to kind of add this like really exaggerated stereo width to your signals, but there's a couple problems with the Haas effect. First of all, it can cause phasing issues, which can cause like your sound to disappear in some funny spots. And then secondly, it also like, you can't really use it too much in a track. You know, the Haas effect is like, it's easily abused and it's easy to fuck up. Right? So check it out. What I like to do is I will put the Haas effect only on the reverb. Okay, so check it out. So we've got a reverb, and now I want to make a wet dry chain. And this is like fundamental, this skill. Okay, so take any plugin. If you want to make a wet dry, take any plugin, right click and group or Command G, and then expand the chains. Right? So now you have two chains, and if you take the effect and you drag it here, it's going to create a new chain for your effect and leave another chain with nothing on it that's dry. So then you have a dry and then you have a wet, okay? And then you want to put, so wet is soloed on your wet chain, and now you'll get reverb, right? So let's just EQ that a bit. I like to take this early reflections thing off. Actually here, let's even, let's get a better oscillator here. Let's do like a just straight, let's do like a saw wave. Yeah, there you can hear a bit better. So I find the reverb sounds best if you disable this early reflections and chorus. But yeah, so that's just the reverb, and now we can mix the wet dry like this. You got 50-50 and then down. So it gives you a lot more control over your effects. But another thing that you can do is to affect just the affected chain, which is what I'm going to do. Yes, someone noticed that I said 2 chains. Yeah. Yams everywhere. All right, so check it out. Now watch what happens to when you put just the Haas effect on the reverb. Oh, oops, no, don't. Right, you get this really artificial sounding reverb, and you can kind of like, right, offset them a lot, and your ear is just like, that shit is super unusual, right? So check it out. But you get like a really unusual reverb, and if you're putting it against like drums or something, it really makes it sit in this different space than the other sounds. Check it out. You know what I'll do? I'm going to put a MIDI riff with less notes, and you'll probably be able to hear this a little better. Let's just do it like that. Actually, here, let's take these notes, make them a bit shorter. Right, so do reverb. See, it's very normal reverb. It has a centered stereo image. And then, like, it almost feels like the reverb is like moving around the room. But yeah, so you can do that to like set a sound out and give it a much more kind of artificial, abnormal space in the mix. And then if you have it on a wet dry, you can mix it in. And another really awesome thing to do with a reverb is, let's say you have a sound with a strong transient on it. Let's put a strong transient on this. Right? And let's say you don't want, because you hear the reverb, it mashes the transient. Right? It's kind of smeared from that Haas effect. If you ever want to make it so that the dry chain mutes the wet chain, check it out. If you put a compressor on your wet chain and you tell it to take side chain from, what track are we, number 2? Track number 2, look, you can specify dry or wet in the chains. You can say dry chain, and then now you hear how the reverb, it's backed off of the transient. So you still get that sharp transient of a dry signal, but you have this extra Haas effect on the outside. And a lot of trap producers will do this. Like when you want to get those really kind of cool, like Martin Garrix sounding pluck noises, where the reverb is like really pumping, but you still have that sharp, dry mono transient. This is a really good way to do that with a sidechain on your reverb. But you know. And then you can kind of tweak the offsets for the 2 sides here. But yeah, it's a really, really good trick to do. Another thing that sounds fucking great is distorting or saturating your reverb. Check it out. If I put the saturator after the reverb here and then, You see how all the texture of the reverb jumps out? Like, it's so much grittier. Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. Okay. Or even if I match the levels. But yeah, and then like a digital clip sounds extra harsh. Sinoid curve fold can sound really harsh. Also, bit reduction can sound really cool on reverbs. Where's the redux? As much as I hate the Ableton bit reduction versus other bit reductions, it is still usable for here. See how it just fucking lights the highs up. Right, so bit reduction sounds really good on reverbs. Saturators sound really good on reverbs. A little bit of compression. If you want to have a reverb that is, because sometimes you have tails are too long on a reverb, right? So if you have a short tail with bit reduction, you get a loud signal and then nothing, right? So that is kind of nice. So here I'll. Right, and you make it so the reverb still cuts off sharply, but you have a nice kind of bit reduction, or sorry, a nice compression. So you still get a very present reverb, but it drops off quickly, right? Okay, so that's like the Haas reverb and some kind of reverb processing tricks. I'm gonna actually just delete, or actually I'll just mute these three, and call this Haas reverb. Yeah, because you weekly downloaders are going to get these racks, so. Okay, so that's one thing. So now another thing that reverb is really good for, right, is when you want to make a sound, you know, a bit softer, right? Which can be very, very useful for like kind of harsh basses, right? Like if I take this wob here. Actually, here, let's crank up the highs. Right? A lot of the time, synth patches like that can sound really kind of harsh in the mix, right? So if you want to soften it with reverb, that can be really cool. If you take the stereo, or take the decay time all the way down, here I'll do the input there. Make sure there's no bass in my reverb. Yeah, you always want a high and low cut of the signal going into the reverb because it just sounds a lot better. But so check it out. So now this sound here, actually I'll make a little. Actually here, let's go to a minor scale here. Okay, so. Oh, don't have my count in on. I had a crash, so I've been trashed my preferences. Hang on. Okay, so now just make a wob here. Whoops, undo that. Okay, let's make a wob here. Oh, there we go. So check this out. Also, if you didn't see the modulation versus automation weekly download, this is really important. So automating this knob is kind of a pain in the ass, and sometimes it's nice to have a wob that is gradually increasing in you know, the depth of the parameter modulation. So check it out. If I take this and I right click and I go show modulation, now I can go like this and make a modulation that will scrub against the maximum of the automation. So you make it low. Okay, so this reverb is softening the sound. right? But sometimes it's too much, right? Now, I will often make a sound 100% wet to really make it a different tone. Like, check it out. Right? But the problem is, this is not really like, it just doesn't sound, it doesn't have the same kind of presence, right? So check it out. If you are ever working, here, I'll get a filter out. So now what you can do, right, is have a longer decay time to get the, you get a bit of a nicer sound out of the reverb, but then macro the filter here after. So you see how you get that nice sharp cutoff? So you can still get the enunciation and clarity of your modulation. Right, now if I take a compressor, in this case I'll use a glue, just whack it, because I'm going for the distortion effect here. Right? Then you can still get that tight, dry sound of the reverb cutting off sharply, but you still get the kind of sharpness. There you still get the tone of the reverb and the fact that it's not a harsh sound, but with the you know, you gotta have your cake and eat it too as reverb, you know, because it's nice to have some stereo image and some depth on your sounds, but you don't want it to feel far away, and you don't want reverb tails cluttering up your mix. So when you're doing it on a wob, it can sound pretty cool, but I also like to do it on chords. So I'm gonna make sure this is, polyphony is up. Yes, okay, so now let's just do a couple quick chords here. So B and A. So let's say you're doing like a kind of, like, you see how that has a really rich tone to it. Like, you get a really rich tone out of it because it's made out of reverb, but then you can bring it back to the front of the mix by distorting it, by saturating it. A little bit of overdrive is really good in this sort of a use, because you can, especially after the filter, it's really nice because you can get that bite back up top. So I'll sometimes put an overdrive to get the bite back up at the top, and then you know you get these really kind of cool chord sounds. I'm actually gonna just for the sake of being illustrating this better. Actually, you know what I can do? I'll undo that. I'll just turn these two oscillators off. Okay, now let's find a saw wave. There, you can hear the effect on the chord. Right, now I'll make it wetter. Right, you see that's just a square wave chord, you know, there's not even any detuning. That's like such a basic patch, but the reverb is bringing this like richness of tone to the patch, and it's softening it in terms of the mix. So if you have like a really, because the thing is, if you have a mix where every sound is as loud and aggressive as possible, it's really hard to get your mix loud because the sounds are fighting, right? Whereas if you have like one or two sounds that are really loud and aggressive, and then some of the other sounds that are kind of like set further back in the mix, you can kind of get the whole mix louder without too much distortion, right? But you see, that's literally just a square wave. Like, check it out before. Like, what a boring patch, right? But then you put a little bit of reverb with some compression and overdrive and stuff. And then you don't have that problem with the reverb tails, and you don't have that problem where it feels too far set back in the mix, but you get like a really rich tone from the reverb. And if you set the reverb, like if you're making samples, set your reverb to high quality mode, because it does make a difference. Like check it out. Like here, I'll take the filter off. And then another thing you can do, just while we're doing this, I want to show you another really great way. Like, let's say you want to kind of make a more unusual filter type. Well, I'm going to, once again, just group the filter and make a wet dry by expanding the chains, right? Drag your effect, drag it onto the next chain. So now this will be low pass. Sorry, I'm going to copy in this case. So we have this one will be LP, and this one will be BP, right? And then check it out. If you have a band pass and a low pass like working together, and then I'm going to change my view here so you can see my macro mapping. Then you map and you slightly change it. So I'm going to make the band pass start a little bit higher than the low pass, right? And now watch them come up together. So this is low pass only, and this is the band pass. Right? And if you put the low pass and the band pass kind of working together, you get that mouthy effect. Like think of the two filters as two lips in a mouth. You know, if you want to get that mouth opening and close, you have to have the filter poles drift from each other so that they're slightly different. And you do that by adjusting the maximum and minimums here. Another thing you can do with this band pass technique, if you want to add some stereo width, if you put just a touch of LFO and then turn the phase up, what this is going to do is it's going to make it so that the left and right speakers are modulating slightly differently, and it's going to create a stereo image, right? That's exaggerated, but if you take it down, you have just a touch of that. As long as you have the phase up, it just mismatches them a little. Right? Now, if you're doing these sorts of effects, sometimes you will, you see how it doesn't go down all the way at the end? And there's a little bit of reverb coming out. What you can do is macro, like put another low pass after the band pass, and just make sure that it's going all the way up. All right, so this low pass goes all the way up, and then it'll cut all the way off. Right, so just low pass, very dry sounding, you know, not very mouthy, and then that'll give it, and then sometimes you put overdrive just on the band pass. But yeah, so if you have these, because this sound of the reverb ringing out would ruin the mix, right? But having the reverb be tightly controlled afterwards is really good. So some reverbs, I'm not sure if the Ableton one does this. Yeah, some reverbs will, is there a repitch mode on it? Yeah, some reverbs will repitch when you adjust the decay time. That can be really cool for these sorts of effects because it gives you a bit of a pitching with it, but I don't think the Ableton one does it. But some of the other reverbs that you will find will do that. So I often will modulate the decay time to get a kind of like pitchy bend. But yeah, the Haas reverb and then, you know, using the reverb to make wobs is just awesome. But yeah, so okay, so I call this multi-filter, and then yeah, and then here I'll just macro this so you can do wet dry. right? So those are that's another use of reverb that you can do. Another really great trick that I just discovered I did on a snare, and this one is Tweaky. Okay, so let's just get a snare. That's a nice one. Okay, let's put it there. Actually, no, wait, I'll put it in a MIDI track. Actually, I can probably find a better snare. Like I said, I just had a crash, so oh, there we go. That's a nice one. I just had a crash, so I trashed my preferences to try and fix it. So Ableton's all a bit wonky today. Apologies. Okay, so check this out. I'm going to put this on a drum rack and just make a snare every other beat. Right? Just to kill the break for a second. Okay, so this is pretty cool. Okay, so we have a standard snare. Now I want to make like a pre-transient that will introduce the snare before the snare happens, right? So this is kind of a weird use of reverb, but I think you'll like it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an audio effect rack and put it on this channel, right? And the only catch, well, here, I'll just show you how it works first, and then I'll explain that catch. Okay, so I'm going to put a reverb first, and let's just get a nice tone out of this reverb. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm using the pre-delay to make it kind of like a double reverb, because the reverb has two things that are happening, right? There's the reflection, which is where it's kind of like an echo, almost like a delay, and then there's the diffusion, which is like, so the echo is when you hear the primary reflection off of whatever, like one central wall, you know, whatever the main walls are, you hear your primary reflections, and then the diffusion is kind of like all the other reflections as the reverb goes all everywhere. So that's what reflect and diffuse are. Right, so this is just reflection. You see how it's a drier sound? Even with a longer decay time, it's still a pretty dry sound, whereas the diffusion is a much more wet sound. And then, if you put pre-delay, you see how they're happening separate? That's what I want, because we're going to make a pre-transient. So now, what I'm going to do here, so this will be early, and then we're going to take another chain and we're going to make it late, and the dry chain is going to be late. Okay, so check this out. So I'll call this late. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a simple delay to make everything that happens on this chain 1/16th note late. Okay, so if you put a delay and you have the feedback all the way down, it just literally delays what's happening on that chain. It'll happen 1/16th note later, right? So check it out. So now the reverb will happen first, and then this will happen. I can make it later. So you hear how the reverb happens first, and then the dry snare happens? If you go like this, you see how it's got that like lead in, like ka-chak. Then you can tweak it with the pre-delay. Get it just how you like it. But the problem is you don't want it to wash out your snare. So what are we going to do again? The compressor trick. So we're going to take the compressor, turn it on, side chain from this drum rack, and then we want the later chain post effects, because we want it to be after that delay. And then take it down. Now listen. Then we can really crush it out of the way. Also, you might want to turn up the release time so you don't get that breathing after. And now we just have this little pre-transient. Right? And then we can adjust the way that comes in. The only catch with this is that you must, if you want your break to come out in time, you must move it 1/16th note to the left. So now, here, I'll put it in with the break, and then I'm just going to mute the snares in the break. See this too? This is very important to understand. I'm going to unlink that envelope and now make a shorter loop that just mutes every snare. Okay, so now I can play the break. So you see how that reverb is like coming into the snare? And then you can adjust it with the pre-transient. And you get that, it's a very subtle effect, but it makes the beat go shagak, shagak, right? So now check it out. And you can see like it's just a really, really weird, like these are all weird uses of reverb. So okay, so I'll call this one pre-transient reverb. And then this would just be some drum break. Okay, and then this would be Haas reverb. And then this one will be reverb wob. Okay, so those are some different things that you can do with reverb. Okay, cool. So yeah, have fun adding these weird reverbs to your tracks and making everything sound all tweaked out. I think it's going to make your music better. Don't forget about doing the wet dry thing. Don't forget about doing the multi-mode filter thing. And don't forget about modulation versus automation, because those are all very important side lessons. All right. I am going to go, but much love to everyone who supports me with the weekly download and at the Producer Dojo website. It's because of you guys that I can devote my time to being in the studio instead of like grinding it out on the road. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to make you lots of good stuff every week. And yeah, if you want to try out the weekly download, you can try it out 30 days risk-free. I'll give you your money back. It is $5 a week, and you get these every week. So go to theweeklydownload.com. This is number 50, so you get all 50 at once for $5 a week, and you can just download them all and ask for your money back if you want. Okay, so go check it out, theweeklydownload.com. Lots of love, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving, Americans, and yeah, big up to all my supporters. Love you guys. Peace.